Every day, a young woman gave a homeless man food from her small street corner. She never asked for anything in return. She did not know his story. But one cold morning, something extraordinary happened. Four black SUVs pulled up right in front of her usual spot, and her whole life changed in a way she never expected. Who were the people in those SUVs? And what was the homeless man's true identity? Sit back and find out. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure you like and you're subscribed to this channel, because this story proves that one act of kindness can change a life forever. Now let's delve into this remarkable story. In a busy corner of downtown Chicago, where the wind cut sharp and the crowds moved fast, a man sat alone on the cold concrete. His name was Henry Caldwell. He was only 35 years old, but the streets had aged him beyond his years, making him look like someone who had forgotten what hope felt like. Every morning, before the city fully woke, he wrapped his worn jacket tighter around his body and whispered to himself, "Just make it through today. Just one more day." Henry's hands were weathered and scarred. His beard had grown wild over months of survival. He carried everything he owned in a torn backpack that sat beside him like a faithful companion. Most mornings, he watched the parade of people rushing past, some in business suits, some clutching coffee cups, all with somewhere important to be. None of them looked at him. To them, he was invisible. But life had not always been this way. Years before, everything had been different. Henry had once been a decorated military intelligence officer, a man people saluted and respected. He'd served 2 tours overseas, earned multiple commendations, and returned home with dreams of building something meaningful. After leaving the service, he met his business partner and co-founded a cybersecurity startup. The company showed incredible promise. Investors were interested. The future looked bright. Back then, he also had someone who mattered more than any business success. Her name was Sarah, his younger sister, his only family. They had grown up together in foster care, protecting each other, promising they'd always be there for one another. Sarah believed in him completely. When the startup needed extra capital, she used her small savings to help him. She told him, "Henry, don't worry. We're going to make it. We always do." He always replied, "I promise, Sarah. I'll make you proud. We'll both have the life we deserve." For a while, everything worked. They talked every day. Henry would share exciting updates about the company. Sarah would laugh and tell him about her job as an elementary school teacher. He was sure their future was secure, that all their childhood struggles had led to this moment of triumph. But then something changed. One cold November evening, Henry's phone rang. It was the hospital. There had been an accident. A drunk driver. Sarah hadn't survived. Henry stared at the doctor delivering the news. His sister was gone. He whispered, "How? How is she just gone?" The grief shattered something fundamental inside him. He stopped going to work. He stopped answering calls. He pushed away every person who tried to help. "Leave me alone," he'd say, his voice hollow. "Just leave me alone." His business partners tried to be patient, but the company needed leadership. After 3 months of Henry's absence, they made the difficult decision. He was forced out. The company he'd built with his own hands continued without him. And Henry? Henry spiraled deeper into darkness. Within 6 months, his savings disappeared. He couldn't pay rent. He sold his furniture, his car, his laptop, everything that connected him to his old life. Eventually, he had nothing left. No home. No purpose. No reason to keep going. He ended up on the streets, broken and invisible, convinced he had failed the one person who'd always believed in him. Now, with no job and no shelter, with grief crushing his chest every single day, Henry, only 35 years old, had no choice but to sit on cold street corners every morning, hoping someone might spare a few dollars, praying he could make it through one more freezing night. One bitter morning, as he sat with his hands buried in his jacket pockets, trying to feel his frozen fingers, he held his empty stomach and whispered, "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't keep my promise." Henry kept sitting on that same corner each day. The wind bit at his face. People flowed past him like water around a stone. He tried making eye contact with a businessman hurrying by. "Sir, please, anything helps," he said quietly. The man looked straight through him and kept walking. Henry tried again with a woman carrying shopping bags. "Ma'am, I'm cold. Just $1 for coffee." She clutched her bags tighter and crossed to the other side of the street. He approached a couple standing at the crosswalk. "Excuse me, I haven't eaten in 2 days." They turned their backs to him without a word, as if he hadn't spoken at all. Some people ignored him completely, as if he didn't exist. Some glanced at him with brief pity before hurrying past. Each rejection felt like confirmation of what he already believed, that he was worthless, that he deserved this suffering, that he should have died instead of Sarah. Each rejection felt heavy. He looked down at his worn shoes. He felt tired, empty, and utterly alone. But something inside him wouldn't let him give up completely. He whispered to himself, "Just one more day. Just survive today." So he took a deep breath, tried to warm his hands, and kept waiting. After a while, the smell of something wonderful caught his attention. About 20 feet away, he saw a small food cart, a modest mobile setup with steam rising from coffee pots and the sweet aroma of breakfast sandwiches filling the cold air. His stomach growled painfully. Henry stood slowly, his legs stiff from sitting, and walked closer. He didn't want to get too close. He'd been shooed away from businesses before. But he found a spot on a nearby bench where he could rest for a moment. He sat down gently, placed his backpack beside him, and simply existed. He didn't ask for anything. He only hoped that maybe, just maybe, someone would see him. But unknown to him, his life was about to change in a way he never imagined. And someone with a kind heart was about to notice him. At the food cart, Angela Dawson moved with practiced efficiency from one task to another. The cart was hers, a small business she had built with her own hands and every dollar she could scrape together. It wasn't big, and it wasn't fancy, but it was everything she had. This cart was her lifeline. She poured coffee into paper cups. She wrapped hot sandwiches in foil. She greeted her regular customers with a warm smile, even when exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. She was only 25, but she carried heavy responsibilities. Her rent had increased again last month. Her student loan payments felt impossible. And her dream of opening a Real restaurant seemed to drift further away with each passing week. Every day as she worked, she told herself, "Angela, don't give up. Keep pushing forward. Something good is coming." After the morning rush ended, she took a moment to wipe down her cart and organize supplies for the lunch crowd. As she worked, something caught her eye. A man was sitting alone on a nearby bench. His clothes were worn and dirty. His beard was unkempt. His shoulders were hunched as if he carried the weight of the world. But what stopped Angela was his face. His eyes looked exhausted, defeated, yet somehow still held a glimmer of something she recognized, dignity barely holding on. Angela paused. "Who is this man?" she whispered to herself. Something about him tugged at her heart. She set down her cleaning cloth and slowly walked toward him. When she reached him, she bent slightly, trying to meet his downcast eyes. "Good morning," she said gently. "I'm Angela. What's your name?" The man looked up slowly, surprised that someone was speaking to him. "Henry," he said in a rough and used voice. Angela gave a small, warm smile. "Henry, it's nice to meet you. Are you hungry?" Henry looked down at his hands. His fingers trembled slightly. Then he said quietly, almost ashamed, I don't have any money." Angela's heart ached at those words. She could see this was a man carrying deep pain, not just physical hunger, but something much heavier. Without hesitation, she stood up and walked back to her cart. "Let me make you something," she whispered to herself. She prepared a hot breakfast sandwich and poured a large coffee, adding extra cream and sugar for energy. She brought it back and placed it gently in Henry's hands. "Here you go," she said. "It's cold out here. You need to eat." Henry stared at the food in disbelief. His eyes began to glisten. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you so much." Angela squeezed his shoulder gently. "Everyone deserves kindness, Mr. Henry. Everyone." Then, without another word, She walked back to her cart, leaving Henry holding the warm food like it was the most precious gift he'd ever received. From that moment, something shifted in both of their lives. And neither of them knew that this simple act of compassion would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Henry stared at the food in disbelief. His eyes began to glisten. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you so much." Angela squeezed his shoulder gently. "Everyone deserves kindness, Mr. Henry. Everyone." Then, without another word, she walked back to her cart, leaving Henry holding the warm food like it was the most precious gift he'd ever received. From that moment, something shifted in both of their lives. And neither of them knew that this simple act of compassion would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. But that wasn't actually the first time Angela had fed Henry. That moment, the one that just happened, had become their daily ritual. To understand how it began, we need to go back 3 months, to a gray October morning when Angela first noticed the man who would change her life. 3 months earlier. The autumn wind had been particularly bitter that day. Angela arrived at her usual corner at 5:30 a.m., earlier than normal because she'd barely slept. Her landlord had called the night before, informing her that rent would increase by $200 starting next month. $200 she didn't have. $200 that might as well have been $2 million. She'd set up her cart mechanically, her mind running calculations that never added up. Coffee pot. Check. Sandwich ingredients. Check. Propane for the small grill. Check. Hope that today's sales would somehow cover next month's impossible bills. Not check. As the sun began to rise weakly through the Chicago clouds, the morning crowd started to trickle in. Angela served her regular customers with her usual smile. Mr. Patterson, who always ordered black coffee and a plain bagel. Mrs. Chun, who liked her breakfast sandwich with extra egg. The construction workers who bought coffee by the gallon. By 7:30 a.m., the morning rush had slowed. Angela was wiping down her counter when movement across the street caught her eye. A man was sitting on the bench outside the closed pharmacy. He wasn't doing anything particularly unusual, just sitting, hunched over, his hands buried in the pockets of a jacket that looked too thin for the weather. But something made Angela pause. Maybe it was the way he held himself, that particular stillness of someone trying to disappear. Maybe it was the way other people flowed around him like he was a rock in a stream, present but unacknowledged. Or maybe it was something in his posture, a heaviness that Angela recognized because she'd felt it herself. She watched him for a moment. His beard was unkempt, his clothes worn. A torn backpack sat beside him. He looked tired. No, not just tired, exhausted in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. It was the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting too long and was running out of reasons to keep fighting. Angela knew that feeling. She'd felt it plenty of times herself, lying awake at 2 a.m., adding and subtracting numbers that refused to work in her favor, wondering if she should just give up on her dreams and get a real job. But something always kept her going. Someone had shown her kindness once when she needed it most. Maybe it was time to pass it forward. Before she could talk herself out of it, Angela prepared a breakfast sandwich, eggs, cheese, and bacon on a toasted roll, and poured a large coffee. She left her cart unattended, something she rarely did, and crossed the street. As she approached, the man didn't look up. He seemed lost in his own world, or maybe just trying to remain invisible. Angela stopped a few feet away, suddenly feeling uncertain. What if he didn't want help? What if she was intruding? But she'd come this far. "Excuse me," she said gently. The man's head lifted slowly. When his eyes met hers, Angela felt her breath catch. She'd expected to see emptiness, defeat, maybe anger. Instead, she saw something that made her heart squeeze, a flicker of dignity struggling to survive. Behind the exhaustion and the pain, there was still a person in there. Still someone who mattered. "I'm Angela," she said, offering a small smile. "I have a food cart across the street. I made too much this morning, and I hate to waste food. Would you be willing to help me out?" It was a small lie, but a kind one. She could see in his eyes that he knew it was a lie too. But it was a lie that let him keep his dignity, and that seemed important. The man stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was real or some kind of cruel joke. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough from disuse. I don't have any money to pay you." Angela's smile widened slightly. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking you to help me not waste perfectly good food. It's getting cold out here. You'd be doing me a favor." She extended the sandwich and coffee toward him. The man looked at the food, then back at her face, then at the food again. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out and took them. "Thank you," he whispered, and there was something in those two words, a lifetime of pain, a hint of disbelief, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. "What's your name?" Angela asked. "Henry," he said quietly. "Well, Mr. Henry, enjoy your breakfast. And if you're here tomorrow morning, I'll probably make too much again." She gave him a warm smile, then turned and walked back to her cart before he could respond. As she crossed the street, she glanced back once. Henry was holding the sandwich in both hands, staring at it like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Then he took a small, careful bite, and Angela saw his eyes close for just a moment of simple gratitude for something warm in a cold world. The next morning, Henry was there again. Same bench, same torn backpack, same tired eyes. And Angela, true to her word, brought him breakfast. "Good morning, Mr. Henry," she said, handing him a coffee and a sandwich wrapped in foil. "Too much again today." Henry looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw the ghost of a smile. "Thank you, Angela." It became their routine. Every morning, Monday through Saturday when Angela worked, she prepared an extra meal. Sometimes it was a sandwich and soup. Sometimes it was scrambled eggs and toast. Sometimes, when she'd had a good sales day, it was a full breakfast with hash browns and fruit. She never made a big deal of it. She never asked questions. She just showed up, day after day, with food and a kind word. At first, their interactions were brief. A simple exchange of food and gratitude. But slowly, over weeks, they began to talk. Just small conversations at first, comments about the weather, observations about the changing season, brief exchanges that lasted no more than a minute or two. One morning in early November, as Angela handed Henry his coffee, she noticed a paperback book tucked into his backpack, a worn copy of Steinbeck's East of Eden. "You like to read?" she asked. Henry nodded, almost embarrassed. "Used to read a lot. Found this in a free library box last week." "That's a good one," Angela said. "Have you read Steinbeck before?" "Yeah." Henry's eyes lit up slightly, the first time she'd seen any real animation in his face. "I read Grapes of Wrath years ago." Steinbeck understood struggle. He understood what it's like when the world breaks you. There was something in the way he said it, not as literary analysis, but as lived experience. Angela felt her heart ache for whatever had brought this man to that bench. Another morning, during a brief spell of unseasonable warmth in late November, Henry asked her a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Angela," he said, his voice hesitant, "why do you do this? Every day, you bring me food. You don't know me. You don't know what kind of person I am, or how I ended up here. Why?" Angela paused in the middle of pouring his coffee. She looked at him directly, wanting him to hear the truth in her words. "Because everyone deserves kindness, Mr. Henry," she said simply. "And because I know what it feels like to struggle. Maybe not the same way you're struggling, but I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning and nobody sees you." Henry's eyes glistened. "You seem like you're doing well," he said quietly. Angela let out a small, sad laugh. "Looks can be deceiving. I'm one bad month away from losing everything myself. My rent went up. My student loans are crushing me. Some weeks, I have to choose between paying my electric bill and buying groceries." She met his eyes. "But I still have more than you do right now. And sharing a sandwich isn't going to break me. If it helps you even a little bit, then it's worth it." Henry was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I used to have a different life," he said, the words coming slowly, as if he was opening a door he'd kept locked for a long time. I wasn't always this. I didn't think you were, Angela said gently. I had a career. I had purpose. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. I had someone who mattered. My sister. She was my only family. And then she died, and I couldn't. He stopped, unable to continue. Angela didn't push. She simply placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, Mr. Henry. I'm so sorry for your loss. They sat in silence for a moment, two people who understood pain in different ways, but recognized it in each other. Something terrible happened to you, Angela said softly, and somehow you ended up here. But you're still here, Mr. Henry. You're still fighting. That takes more strength than most people realize. Henry looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with disbelief, as if he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a person rather than a problem. From that day forward, their morning exchanges grew slightly longer. Henry began to share small pieces of his past, that he'd been in the military, that he'd had a business once, that he loved technology and books and classical music. He never shared the full story of his downfall, and Angela never pressed. She simply listened, acknowledged, and continued to show up. What Angela never told Henry was the cost of her daily kindness. The truth was, her financial situation was even more desperate than she'd let on. Some mornings, the food she gave Henry was supposed to be her own lunch. She'd skip eating entirely, telling herself she wasn't that hungry, that she could wait until dinner, that Henry needed it more. Her roommate, Jessica, had noticed. "Girl, you're losing weight," she'd said one evening. "Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine," Angela had insisted. "Just trying to save money." "By starving yourself?" "Angela, you can't help other people if you're running on empty." But Angela couldn't stop. Every time she thought about skipping a day, she'd remember the look in Henry's eyes that first morning, that flicker of hope that someone had finally seen him. How could she take that away? Besides, helping Henry helped her too, in a way she couldn't quite explain. When her own problems felt overwhelming, when the weight of her student loans and rising rent and fading dreams pressed down on her chest, feeding Henry reminded her that she still had something to give, that she still mattered, that kindness still existed in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. One particularly difficult morning in early December, after Angela's landlord had threatened eviction if she was late with rent one more time, she stood at her cart preparing Henry's breakfast with tears streaming down her face. She wiped them away quickly, not wanting her customers to see, not wanting anyone to know how close to breaking she was. But as she wrapped the sandwich in foil and poured the coffee, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She might be struggling. She might be scared. She might not know how she was going to make rent next month. But she could do this one thing. She could show up for Henry. She could prove that kindness still existed. And somehow, that was enough to keep her going. As December deepened and Christmas lights began appearing in shop windows, Angela continued her daily ritual. Snow fell. Temperatures dropped. The wind grew harsher. But every morning that she worked, she brought Henry food. And every morning, Henry was there to receive it, his gratitude evident in his eyes even when words failed him. Neither of them knew it yet, but something profound was happening. Angela's consistent kindness was planting a seed that would eventually grow into something neither of them could have imagined. In showing Henry that he still mattered, that he was still worthy of compassion, Angela was giving him something far more valuable than food. She was giving him a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could get better. That maybe he was worth saving. That maybe Sarah's death didn't mean his life had to end too. And though the winter was long and cold, though both of them struggled through their own private battles, that small daily act of kindness became a light in the darkness for both of them. A light that, unknown to either of them, was about to grow brighter than they ever dreamed possible. Henry Caldwell hadn't always been the invisible man on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Madison Street. 3 years ago, he'd been someone entirely different, someone he barely recognized when he caught his reflection in store windows. 3 years ago, Captain Henry Caldwell had been a decorated military intelligence officer with a chest full of commendations and a future that looked unstoppable. He could still remember the weight of his uniform, pressed and sharp. He could still recall the satisfaction of solving complex problems, of protecting his country, of being part of something bigger than himself. 2 tours overseas, one in Afghanistan, one in Iraq, had taught him discipline, resilience, and the value of clear thinking under pressure. He'd earned the respect of his superiors and the loyalty of his team. When he'd received his honorable discharge, multiple generals had shaken his hand and told him he had a bright future ahead. They'd been right, at least for a while. After leaving the military, Henry had channeled his intelligence training into the private sector. He'd met Marcus Chin at a tech conference in San Francisco, a brilliant software engineer with ideas about cybersecurity that matched Henry's understanding of real-world threats. Together, they'd co-founded SecureNet Solutions, a cybersecurity startup that combined military-grade security protocols with cutting-edge technology. The company had taken off faster than either of them had expected. Within 18 months, they'd secured contracts with 3 major corporations and had venture capitalists calling weekly. Henry had moved into a nice apartment in Lincoln Park, started dating again, and for the first time in his life, felt like he was building something that would last. But more important than any business success was Sarah. Sarah Caldwell, his younger sister by 3 years, had been his anchor since childhood. They'd grown up in foster care together, bouncing from home to home, but always protecting each other. When other kids had families to go home to for holidays, Henry and Sarah had only each other. That had been enough. More than enough. Sarah had become an elementary school teacher, pouring her heart into helping kids who reminded her of themselves, kids who needed someone to believe in them. She'd been so proud of Henry's success, constantly bragging about her big brother, the veteran entrepreneur. When SecureNet needed an extra $15,000 for a crucial server upgrade, Sarah had emptied her savings account without hesitation. "We're family," she'd said, hugging him tight. "We've always had each other's backs. That's never going to change." Henry had promised her that once the company went big, he'd pay her back 10 times over. He'd buy her a house, help her start her own school, make sure she never had to worry about money again. He never got the chance. November 17th, 3 years ago. The date was burned into Henry's memory like a brand. He'd been in a meeting with potential investors, his phone on silent. When he'd finally checked it 3 hours later, he'd found 12 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. The police officer on the other end had been gentle but direct. There'd been an accident on I-90. A drunk driver had crossed the median. Sarah's car had been hit head-on. She died instantly, they assured him, as if that made it better. As if knowing she hadn't suffered could fill the gaping hole that had suddenly opened in his chest. Henry had stood in that bright San Francisco conference room, surrounded by people congratulating him on a successful pitch, and felt his entire world collapse. The funeral was small. Sarah's teacher friends came, crying and sharing stories about her kindness. A few of Henry's business associates showed up, offering condolences that felt hollow. But mostly, it was just Henry, standing beside a casket that held the only family he'd ever had, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his entire life. After that, something fundamental broke inside him. He stopped going to the office. Marcus called repeatedly, concerned at first, then frustrated, then angry. Henry ignored him. He ignored everyone. His apartment became a cave where he sat in darkness, replaying every memory of Sarah, torturing himself with guilt. Why hadn't he insisted she get a safer car? Why hadn't he driven her himself that day? Why was he alive when she wasn't? The grief was like drowning in slow motion. Some days he couldn't get out of bed. Some days he forgot to eat. Some days he'd start crying and couldn't stop for hours. His friends tried to help. They brought food. They offered to pay for therapy. They sat with him in silence when he couldn't speak. "Leave me alone," he'd say, his voice dead. "Just leave me alone." Eventually they did. Marcus and their other business partners waited 3 months, trying to be understanding. But SecureNet couldn't survive without active leadership. The investors were getting nervous. Opportunities were being missed. Finally, in February, they made the decision to force Henry out of the company. He didn't fight it. He didn't care. Without Sarah, none of it mattered anyway. The descent happened faster than Henry would have thought possible. His savings dwindled as he stopped working, but kept paying rent on an apartment he barely lived in. He stopped paying attention to bills. His bank account emptied. His credit cards maxed out. Collection agencies started calling, but he didn't answer. By May, 6 months after Sarah's death, Henry was evicted. He'd sold most of his belongings to pay debts, but it wasn't enough. One morning, he'd walked out of his apartment building with just a backpack full of clothes and nowhere to go. The streets had swallowed him quickly. The first few nights, he'd told himself it was temporary, that he'd figure something out. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months. He learned which alleys were safe to sleep in. He learned which soup kitchens served meals on which days. He learned how to become invisible, how to endure the cold, how to survive. But surviving wasn't the same as living. Most days, Henry wished he'd died in that car instead of Sarah. At least then she'd still be here, still teaching kids, still making the world better. What was he doing? Taking up space, wasting oxygen, being a burden on a world that had moved on without him. He stopped thinking about his past life. It hurt too much to remember who he'd been: Captain Caldwell, the decorated veteran; Henry Caldwell, the successful entrepreneur. That person was gone, as dead as Sarah. What remained was just a shell, going through the motions of existence because he didn't have the courage to stop. The other homeless people tried to talk to him sometimes, but Henry kept to himself. He sat on his bench, invisible to the thousands of people who passed by every day. He watched them rush to jobs, to meetings, to lives that had meaning and purpose. He was a ghost haunting the edges of a world that no longer had room for him. Then one cold October morning, a young woman with kind eyes had crossed the street and offered him a sandwich. At first, Henry hadn't known what to make of Angela. Was this pity? Charity? Some kind of social experiment? But she kept coming back, day after day, week after week. And slowly, something began to shift inside him. It was the way she looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him, like he was a person who mattered. The way she called him Mr. Henry, giving him dignity he hadn't felt in years. The way she never made him feel ashamed, never asked invasive questions, never treated him like a project or a problem to solve. Everyone deserves kindness, she'd said. Such simple words. But they'd cracked something open in Henry's frozen heart. For 3 months now, Angela had been showing up. And for 3 months, Henry had been waking up each morning with a reason to keep going. Not a big reason, not a life-changing reason, but a reason nonetheless. She would come. She would see him. She would remind him that he was still human. As December's cold deepened and Christmas approached, Henry found himself thinking about his life differently. For the first time since Sarah's death, he caught himself wondering if maybe, possibly, there might be a way forward. Not back to who he'd been, that Henry was gone forever, but maybe to someone new. Someone who could live with the grief. Someone who could honor Sarah's memory by actually living instead of just existing. Angela's kindness had planted a seed. A tiny, fragile seed of hope. And though Henry was still on the streets, still struggling, still broken in fundamental ways, that seed was beginning to grow. He didn't know it yet, but that seed was about to change everything. December gave way to January, and January melted into February. Through the bitter cold and occasional snowstorms, Angela showed up at her cart every morning, and Henry waited on his bench. What had started as a simple act of kindness had evolved into something deeper. A connection that neither of them had expected, but both had come to depend on. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. What had once been brief exchanges of food and gratitude became genuine moments of human connection in a city where millions of people passed each other without truly seeing one another. One particularly cold morning in mid-January, after Angela had handed Henry his usual coffee and breakfast sandwich, He didn't immediately leave as he sometimes did. Instead, he sat on the bench, and Angela found herself sitting beside him for a moment, her cart quiet between the morning and lunch rushes. "Can I ask you something?" Henry said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Of course. What made you stop that first day? What made you see me when everyone else just walks past?" Angela thought about it for a moment, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup for warmth. "I guess. I saw someone who was still fighting. Most people looked at you and saw a homeless man. I looked at you and saw a person who was trying to survive something terrible. There's a difference." Henry's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. "You remind me that there's still good in this world," he said quietly, his voice thick. "Some days, you're the only good thing I see." Angela felt her own throat tighten. She reached over and squeezed his shoulder gently. "There's good in you too, Mr. Henry. I can see it. Whatever happened to you, whatever brought you here, it didn't destroy who you are underneath. You're still in there." Henry looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw a flicker of something beyond survival. Something that looked almost like hope. As winter slowly released its grip on Chicago, their morning conversations became a ritual both of them treasured. Angela learned more about Henry's past in small, carefully revealed pieces. He told her about his time in the military, about the satisfaction of serving something bigger than himself. He mentioned his sister only once, and when he did, his voice broke so completely that Angela simply held his hand and let him cry quietly on that bench while the morning crowds flowed past, oblivious. "Sarah would have liked you," Henry said when he could finally speak again. "She believed in kindness too. She spent her whole life trying to help kids nobody else cared about." "She sounds like she was an amazing person," Angela said softly. "She was. She was everything good in this world. And I couldn't protect her." His voice cracked on the last word. "Mr. Henry, some things are beyond our control. That doesn't make them our fault." He didn't respond, but he squeezed her hand in silent gratitude. Angela began to ask Henry's opinion on small things. Which sandwich combination she should add to her menu, whether the coffee was too strong, what he thought about the new construction going up across the street. At first, he seemed surprised that anyone would value his input. But gradually, she watched him sit a little straighter when she approached, saw him actually consider her questions before answering thoughtfully. One morning in early March, when the first hints of spring were teasing the city with warmer air, Angela brought him a breakfast sandwich with a new combination she was testing. "I want your honest opinion on this," she said. "I'm thinking of adding it to the menu, but I need someone with good taste to tell me if it's worth it." Henry took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and considered. "The bacon's good, but it needs something. Maybe avocado. Some kind of fresh element to balance the richness." Angela's face lit up. "That's brilliant. You're absolutely right. See, you've got a gift for this." The small smile that crossed Henry's face made Angela's entire morning worthwhile. But what Henry didn't know, what Angela worked hard to keep hidden, was that her own situation was deteriorating rapidly. By February, she was 2 months behind on rent. Her landlord had stopped being understanding and started being threatening. Her student loan payments were in default. The collection calls came daily. She'd stopped answering her phone entirely. Some days, the sandwich and coffee she brought Henry was supposed to be her own lunch and dinner combined. She'd skip eating, telling herself she could wait, that she wasn't that hungry, that her body could handle it. She'd lost 15 pounds since October, and her roommate Jessica had started leaving concerned notes on the fridge. "Angela, please eat something. You can't keep doing this to yourself." But Angela couldn't stop. Every morning when she saw Henry's face light up as she approached, every time she watched him sit a little taller, speak a little more confidently, she knew she was doing something that mattered. In a life that often felt like it was falling apart, helping Henry was the one thing that made sense. Her regular customers noticed her consistency with Henry. Reactions were mixed. Mr. Patterson, the black coffee and bagel regular, pulled her aside one morning. "You know that guy's probably going to expect it forever now. You're enabling him. But Mrs. Chun disagreed. What you're doing is beautiful, she said, pressing an extra $5 into Angela's hand. Put that toward his meals. The world needs more people like you. A construction worker named Mike started bringing extra sandwiches from home. For your friend, he'd say gruffly, not quite meeting her eyes, as if embarrassed by his own kindness. Slowly, Angela realized she wasn't just helping Henry. She was showing other people that compassion was possible, that small acts mattered, that one person could make a difference. But the toll on her own life was becoming impossible to ignore. By late March, Angela received an eviction notice. 30 days to catch up on rent or get out. She stared at the paper in her tiny apartment, feeling the walls close in. How had it come to this? She'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and still it wasn't enough. That night, she sat on her floor and cried, the eviction notice crumpled in her hands. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was foolish. Maybe she needed to take care of herself first. But the next morning, when she saw Henry waiting on his bench, she prepared his breakfast without hesitation. Because some things mattered more than money. Some things mattered more than security. Some things mattered more than playing it safe. Henry, for his part, was changing in ways Angela couldn't fully see. For the first time in 3 years, he'd started to care about his appearance. Not much, but a little. He used public restroom sinks to wash his face more carefully. He tried to comb his hair with his fingers. He sat straighter, made eye contact with Angela when they talked, even started saying good morning to other regulars who passed by. The change was subtle but real. Angela's daily kindness had reminded him of something he'd forgotten, that he was worthy of care, that his presence mattered, that his life had value beyond mere survival. One morning in early April, Henry did something he hadn't done in years. He laughed. Angela had told him a story about a customer who'd ordered a coffee with everything, and then been shocked when she'd literally added everything. Henry's laugh was rusty and unexpected, but genuine. I forgot what that felt like, he said, almost wonderstruck. Laughing. Feeling. Light, even for a moment. Angela smiled. You should laugh more, Mr. Henry. You have a good laugh. As the days grew longer and warmer, as spring truly arrived in Chicago with blooming flowers and lighter jackets, both Angela and Henry felt something shifting. For Angela, it was a growing desperation mixed with stubborn determination. For Henry, it was the first fragile shoots of hope breaking through frozen ground. Neither of them spoke about the future. Neither of them made plans beyond tomorrow's breakfast. But both of them felt, in ways they couldn't quite articulate, that something was building toward a moment of change. Months passed. Winter turned to spring. Angela continued her daily ritual despite her own crumbling circumstances. Henry continued to heal in small, almost imperceptible ways. The bond between them deepened, built on nothing more than consistency, kindness, and the shared understanding that both of them were fighting battles nobody else could see. And as April moved toward May, as the city came alive with new growth and possibility, neither Angela nor Henry knew that everything was about to change. Neither of them could have imagined that the small seed of kindness planted on a cold October morning was about to bloom into something extraordinary. But change was coming, and it was coming soon. April 28th. The date felt significant to Henry Caldwell, though Angela wouldn't understand why. Not yet. 3 months earlier, on a particularly brutal January morning when the wind chill had dropped to -15 degrees, Henry had made a decision that would change everything. It hadn't been a dramatic moment, no lightning bolt of inspiration, no sudden epiphany. It had been quiet, almost mundane. Angela had brought him his usual coffee and sandwich, but she'd also brought a pair of thick wool socks. I noticed your shoes have holes, she'd said simply, handing him the package. Wet feet in this weather can be dangerous. Henry had stared at those socks, inexpensive, practical, given without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. And something inside him had finally cracked open completely. Not broken, but opened. Like a door he'd kept locked for 3 years had suddenly swung wide, letting light flood into a dark room. That night, shivering in a shelter, Henry had pulled out something he'd kept hidden in the bottom of his backpack for months. A creased business card from Major David Morrison, his former commanding officer. Morrison had tracked Henry down 6 months after Sarah's death, pressing the card into his hand before Henry had pushed him away like everyone else. "When you're ready," Morrison had said, "call me. There are people who can help. You don't have to do this alone." Henry had kept the card but never used it. Until that January night, when Angela's simple gift of warm socks had reminded him that maybe, just maybe, he was worth saving. The next morning, Henry had walked to a public library and used their phone to make a call that terrified him. His hands had shaken as he dialed. His voice had cracked when Morrison answered. "Dave," he'd said. "It's Henry Caldwell. I think I need help." Morrison hadn't hesitated. "I'll be there in an hour. Tell me where you are." The Veterans Restoration Program had been housed in a modest building on the south side of Chicago. When Morrison had driven Henry there that first day, Henry had almost bolted from the car 3 times. What if they couldn't help him? What if he was too broken? What if he failed again? But he'd thought about Angela, about her daily kindness, about how she never gave up on him even when he'd given up on himself. If she could show up every single day despite her own struggles, he could walk through this door. The program had been more comprehensive than Henry had expected. It wasn't just about getting people off the streets. It was about rebuilding shattered lives from the ground up. They'd started with the basics: medical care, dental work, counseling. Henry had been assigned to Dr. Patricia Williams, a therapist who specialized in grief and PTSD. "You survived 2 tours of duty," she'd told him in their first session. "But the war that's killing you is the one inside your own head. We're going to fight that war together, and we're going to win." The first month had been the hardest. Henry had attended daily counseling sessions, joined group therapy with other veterans, and slowly begun to process the grief he'd been drowning in for 3 years. Some days he'd made progress. Other days he'd wanted to run back to his bench and give up entirely. But every morning, before his appointments, Henry would walk to Angela's cart. He never told her what he was doing. He wasn't ready yet, wasn't sure if it would work. But seeing her, receiving her kindness, reminded him why he was fighting. If she believed he was worth caring for, maybe he could believe it too. By February, the program had moved him into transitional housing, a small room in a supervised facility, but it was warm and dry and his. They'd given him new clothes, helped him trim his beard properly, and connected him with job counseling services. And then, in early March, something extraordinary happened. Henry had been meeting with his case manager, Robert Chun, going over his history for employment purposes. Robert had pulled up Henry's old resume and work history, including his time at SecureNet Solutions. "Wait," Robert had said, staring at his computer screen. SecureNet Solutions. That company was just acquired. It was all over the tech news. Henry had felt his chest tighten. Acquired? Yeah, by Fortress Defense Systems. Major acquisition, $340 million. It was. Robert had stopped, his eyes widening as he read more. "Henry, when were you forced out of the company?" "February, 3 years ago." "Why?" Robert had turned his screen around, his hands trembling slightly. "Because according to this article, you're listed as one of the original co-founders. And according to corporate law, even if you were forced out, you're still entitled to a percentage of any acquisition that happens within 5 years of your departure." Henry had stared at the screen, not comprehending. The words blurred together. What does that mean?" "It means," Robert had said slowly, "that you might be entitled to a substantial portion of that $340 million. Henry, this could be life-changing money." The room had spun. Henry had gripped the edge of the desk, certain he'd misheard, certain this was some kind of cruel mistake. Companies like SecureNet didn't just hand over millions of dollars. There had to be a catch. But there wasn't. Over the next 6 weeks, Robert had connected Henry with a lawyer who specialized in corporate acquisitions. The lawyer, Sarah Chun, the coincidence of her name had made Henry cry, had reviewed every document, every contract, every detail of Henry's departure from SecureNet. "Mr. Caldwell," she'd said during their third meeting, "I've confirmed everything. As an original co-founder, you're entitled to 15% of the acquisition price. After taxes and legal fees, you're looking at approximately $38 million. $38 million. Henry had walked out of that meeting in a daze. He'd sat in a park for 3 hours, unable to process what he'd just learned. 3 years ago, he'd been a millionaire on paper but broken by grief. Then he'd lost everything and become homeless. Now, through a twist of fate he couldn't have imagined, he was wealthy beyond anything he'd ever dreamed. But the money wasn't what made him cry as he sat on that park bench. What made him cry was the realization that Angela had saved his life. If she hadn't shown him kindness, if she hadn't reminded him he was human, he would never have made that phone call to Morrison. He would never have entered the program. He would never have been in Robert Chen's office to learn about the acquisition. Angela's kindness had literally saved him, and she had no idea. The transformation happened quickly after that. Henry's acquisition money had been processed and transferred by mid-April. Suddenly, he had resources he'd never imagined. He'd hired a full team, lawyers, accountants, a personal assistant named Marcus who helped him navigate his new reality. He'd gotten comprehensive medical care, proper dental work, new clothes that actually fit. He'd rented a luxury apartment in downtown Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. He'd bought a car, opened new bank accounts, and slowly reclaimed the identity he'd lost. But through it all, Henry had kept his distance from Angela's corner. He'd wanted to rush to her immediately, to tell her everything, to thank her. But his therapist, Dr. Williams, had advised patience. "You need to be stable first," she'd said. "You need to be strong enough to handle this emotionally. And you need to have a real plan for how you want to thank her. This woman saved your life. Don't waste this opportunity by rushing it." So Henry had waited, planned, and prepared. He'd hired a private investigator, not to invade Angela's privacy, but to understand what she truly needed. What he learned had broken his heart. Angela Dawson was drowning. She was 3 months behind on rent with an eviction notice pending. Her student loans were in default. She'd been skipping meals to afford the food she gave him. She was one disaster away from being homeless herself. And she'd never said a word. She'd never complained. She just kept showing up, kept giving, kept treating him like he mattered even as her own life crumbled around her. Henry had sat in his new apartment, reading the investigator's report with tears streaming down his face. This woman, this incredible, selfless woman, had sacrificed everything to show kindness to a stranger. She'd given when she had nothing to give. She'd cared when no one else had. And now it was his turn. He'd spent 2 weeks planning everything meticulously. He'd consulted with his lawyers, his financial advisors, and his therapist. He'd purchased a building 3 blocks from Angela's usual corner, a building with a fully equipped commercial kitchen that had once been a restaurant. He'd established a foundation in Angela's name. He'd prepared documents, organized his team, and made arrangements for everything. Now, on the morning of April 28th, Henry stood in his apartment wearing a tailored suit, looking at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was someone he barely recognized. Healthy, clean-shaven, clear-eyed. But also someone he remembered. Captain Caldwell. Henry Caldwell, the entrepreneur. Henry Caldwell, the survivor. Henry Caldwell, the man who'd been saved by kindness and was about to return that gift 1,000-fold. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his assistant. "Everything is ready. The team is in position. For vehicles are standing by. Whenever you're ready, sir." Henry took a deep breath. 3 months ago, he'd been a homeless man waiting on a cold bench, believing his life was over. Today, he was about to change Angela's life the way she'd changed his. "It's time," he said to his reflection. "Today I return to that corner. Today I change her life the way she changed mine." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Behind him, his phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. "Sir, I've confirmed that Ms. Dawson is at her cart this morning. We're ready when you are." Henry smiled, a real smile, the the kind he hadn't felt capable of for 3 years. "Angela Dawson," he whispered as he stepped into the elevator. "You saved a broken man. Now let me show you what miracles your kindness created." The 4 black SUVs were waiting outside his building, engines running, ready to change everything. April 28th started like any other morning for Angela Dawson. Her alarm went off at 4:45 a.m. in the tiny apartment she was about to lose. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning with calculations that never added up, worries that never resolved. The eviction notice on her refrigerator gave her 6 more days. 6 days to come up with 3 months of back rent, or she'd be on the streets herself. But she pushed those thoughts away as she dressed in the dark, careful not to wake Jessica. She had a job to do. She had customers who depended on her. And most importantly, she had Henry waiting for his breakfast. By 5:30 a.m., Angela was at her usual corner, setting up her cart with practiced efficiency. Coffee pot, check. Propane connected, check. Breakfast supplies organized, check. The routine was comforting in its familiarity, a small island of control in a life that felt increasingly chaotic. As the sun began to rise, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and pink, Angela prepared Henry's breakfast: scrambled eggs with cheese, bacon, and toast, plus a large coffee with extra cream the way he liked it. She packed it carefully in a container, the way she did every morning, and waited for him to appear. But as 6:30 a.m. came and went, then 7 a.m., Angela felt a growing unease settle in her chest. Henry wasn't on his bench. She craned her neck, scanning the street in both directions. Sometimes he was a few minutes late, delayed by shelter checkout times or other complications of street life. But by 7:30 a.m., with the morning rush in full swing and no sign of Henry, Angela's unease had transformed into genuine worry. Where was he? She served her regular customers on autopilot, her mind racing. Had something happened to him? Had he gotten sick? Injured? She knew how dangerous street life could be, especially for someone who'd been living rough for years. What if he'd been attacked? What if he'd frozen during one of the cold nights last week? What if something terrible had happened and she'd never see him again? The thought made her chest tighten painfully. Henry had become more than just someone she fed. He'd become her friend, her reminder that kindness mattered, her reason to keep going when everything else felt hopeless. The idea of losing him felt unbearable. By 8 a.m., Angela was fighting back tears as she absently wiped down her cart. She kept glancing toward his bench, willing him to appear. Maybe she should go look for him. Maybe she should check the local shelters, ask if anyone had seen him. Then she heard it, a deep, powerful rumble of engines. Multiple engines, moving in unison. Angela looked up, her hand pausing mid-wipe. The morning traffic noise was constant in downtown Chicago, but this was different. This was deliberate, purposeful, growing louder. 4 sleek black SUVs turned onto her street, moving in perfect formation like a presidential motorcade. They were identical, dark, expensive, with tinted windows that reflected the morning sun. The kind of vehicles that belonged to corporate executives or government officials, not to the modest corner where Angela sold breakfast sandwiches. The SUVs slowed as they approached her cart. Angela's heart began to pound. Her hands trembled as she gripped her coffee pot, her mind racing with confused, frightened thoughts. Was she in trouble? Had she violated some permit she didn't know about? Were these immigration officials? Police? Corporate lawyers coming to shut down her cart for some obscure zoning violation? She thought about running, but her legs wouldn't move. She could only stand there, frozen, as the 4 black SUVs came to a synchronized stop directly in front of her cart, blocking her view of the street beyond. For a moment, nothing happened. The engines idled. The tinted windows revealed nothing. Angela's breath came in short, shallow gasps. Around her, other pedestrians had stopped to watch, sensing that something significant was happening. Then, with precise timing, doors began to open. From the first SUV, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped out. He was African American, probably in his 40s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He surveyed the area with the practiced eye of a security professional. From the second SUV, two more people emerged. A woman in a navy business suit carrying a leather portfolio, and another man in a dark suit who immediately took a position near the vehicle. Angela's hands shook harder. Her mind screamed with questions. What was happening? Why were all these important-looking people at her cart? Then the back door of the third SUV opened, and Henry Caldwell stepped out. Angela's world stopped. For a moment, she was certain her eyes were playing tricks on her. This couldn't be Henry. This couldn't be the man who'd sat on that bench for months in worn clothes and an unkempt beard. The man she'd fed every morning. The man who'd looked so tired and broken. But it was. His beard was neatly trimmed, shaped professionally to frame his face in a way that revealed strong features she'd never fully seen. His hair was cut and styled. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, the kind of suit that cost more than Angela made in a month. His shoes were polished leather, gleaming in the morning sun. But more than his appearance, it was his bearing that shocked her. He stood straight and tall, his shoulders back with a confidence she'd never witnessed. His face looked healthy, filled out, no longer gaunt with hunger and exposure. His skin had color. His eyes, those same eyes that had looked so defeated for months, now shone with clarity, purpose, and something else she couldn't identify. He looked like a completely different person, not just clean and well-dressed, but transformed. Powerful, important, like someone who belonged in those black SUVs, who commanded teams of assistants, who moved through the world with authority. The breakfast container slipped from Angela's hand, hitting the edge of her cart with a dull thud. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. It was as if the Henry she knew had been a disguise, and this was his true form. "Mr. Henry?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Henry's face softened the moment he heard her voice. His professional demeanor cracked, revealing genuine emotion underneath. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, as if approaching something precious and fragile. Behind him, his associates, the suited men and women who'd emerged from the other vehicles, maintained a respectful distance, forming a loose perimeter but giving them space. As Henry crossed the distance between the SUV and her cart, Angela noticed other details. An expensive watch on his wrist. A leather briefcase carried by one of his assistants. The way the other suited people deferred to him, waiting for his instructions. This wasn't just a cleaned-up homeless man who'd gotten lucky. This was someone with real power, real wealth, real authority. A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk. Morning commuters slowed their rush, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. A few people had their phones out, recording. Angela barely noticed. Her entire focus was on the man approaching her cart. The man she thought she knew but suddenly realized she didn't know at all. Henry stopped a few feet away from her cart. Up close, the transformation was even more staggering. This was the same man. She could see it in his eyes, in the slight way he tilted his head, in the gentle expression on his face. But he'd been so thoroughly transformed that it felt like meeting him for the first time. "Angela," he said, and his voice was different too. Still gentle, still carrying that slight roughness from years of hardship, but stronger now, steadier, filled with emotion barely contained. Angela gripped the edge of her cart to keep herself upright. Her mind spun with questions, confusion, shock. "Mr. Henry, what? I don't understand. Where have you been? What is all this? I was so worried about you." Henry's expression shifted, and she saw tears beginning to form in his eyes despite his composed exterior. "I know. I'm sorry I worried you. I'm sorry I disappeared without explanation. But Angela, I need to tell you the truth about who I am. I need to tell you what your kindness did for me." Angela shook her head slightly, still trying to process. I don't understand what's happening. Who are all these people? Why are you dressed like this? Mr. Henry, what's going on?" "My name is Henry Caldwell," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion clear in his eyes. 3 months ago, I was exactly who you thought I was, a homeless veteran living on the streets, broken by grief, convinced my life was over. Angela's eyes widened. 3 months ago. But you were just. Yesterday morning you were. Henry shook his head gently. No, I wasn't on that bench yesterday. I haven't been there for 3 months. You see, Angela, in January, after you gave me those warm socks, I finally found the courage to do something I should have done years ago. I asked for help. The world seemed to tilt. Angela grabbed her cart harder. What? I entered a veterans restoration program. I got counseling, housing, medical care. I started to heal from the grief that destroyed me. And while I was in that program, I discovered something I never knew, something that changed everything. One of the suited men stepped forward, holding out a folder. Henry took it, but didn't open it yet. His eyes remained locked on Angela's face. The company I co-founded before I became homeless, SecureNet Solutions, it was acquired by a major defense contractor while I was on the streets. Acquired for $340 million. He paused, letting that sink in. As an original founder, I was entitled to a percentage of that acquisition. Angela, I'm not just back on my feet. I'm wealthy beyond anything I ever imagined. Angela's knees nearly buckled. The numbers didn't make sense. $340 million? The man she'd been feeding breakfast sandwiches to was, what? A millionaire? Her mind refused to accept it. But none of that matters as much as this, Henry continued, taking a step closer. His voice dropped, becoming more intimate despite the crowd gathering around them. You saved my life, Angela Dawson. Not with money or connections or anything except simple, consistent kindness. You fed me when you could barely feed yourself. You treated me with dignity when I felt worthless. You showed up every single day and reminded me that I was human, that I mattered, that life was worth living. Tears were streaming down Angela's face now. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stare at this man who'd been broken and was now whole, who'd been powerless and was now powerful, who'd been invisible and was now commanding the attention of an entire city block. For 3 months, Henry said, his own voice breaking slightly. While I was getting help, getting healthy, reclaiming my life, I thought about you every single day. I thought about how you never gave up on me. I thought about how your kindness planted a seed of hope in the darkest period of my life. And I made a promise to myself. When I was strong enough, when I was ready, I would come back. I would find you, and I would change your life the way you changed mine. He gestured to the suited people behind him, to the black SUVs, to the folder in his hands. I've spent the last month preparing for this moment, Angela. Learning about your struggles, understanding what you need, planning how I can repay even a fraction of what you gave me. Angela's hands covered her mouth, her whole body shaking. This couldn't be real. It was too much, too overwhelming, too impossible. Henry took one more step closer, now standing directly in front of her cart. The same cart where she'd served him breakfast hundreds of times. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Angela Dawson, he said softly, you gave me food when I was hungry. But more than that, you gave me hope when I had none. You reminded me that I mattered when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself. Now it's my turn. He opened the folder, but his eyes never left her face. It's my turn to tell you that you matter, that your kindness matters, that your sacrifices and your struggles and your incredible heart deserve to be recognized and rewarded. The crowd around them had grown larger. Angela could hear murmurs, see phones recording, feel the weight of dozens of eyes on this moment. But she couldn't look away from Henry, from Mr. Henry, from this impossible transformation, from whatever was about to happen next. Angela, Henry said, his voice filled with emotion and determination, your life is about to change, and I need you to understand that you deserve every single thing I'm about to give you. Not as charity, not as pity, but as recognition of the extraordinary person you are and the incredible thing you did when you chose to see a homeless man as human. He held out the folder toward her with both hands, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Are you ready? He asked gently. Angela couldn't speak. She could only nod, her whole world narrowing to this moment, to this impossible miracle unfolding in front of her breakfast cart on an ordinary Tuesday morning that had suddenly become the most extraordinary day of her life. Angela took the folder with trembling hands, but Henry gently placed his hand over hers, stopping her from opening it. "Wait," he said softly. "Before you look at what's inside, I need you to understand the full story. I need you to know exactly who I was, what happened to me, and how you saved me. You deserve to know everything." Angela nodded, unable to speak, tears already streaming down her face. Henry took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the gathered crowd. He wasn't just talking to Angela anymore. He was bearing witness to a truth that needed to be told. 6 months ago, he began, I was at my lowest point. I'd been living on the streets for nearly 3 years. I slept in alleys, in shelters when I could get a spot, sometimes on that bench where you found me. I was invisible. People walked past me every day, thousands of people, and not one of them saw me. Not really. I was just another homeless man, another problem to avoid, another reminder of how cruel life can be. Angela's throat tightened. She remembered that version of Henry so clearly, hunched, defeated, wearing exhaustion like a second skin. But I wasn't always that man, Henry continued. 10 years ago, I was Captain Henry Caldwell, a military intelligence officer with 2 tours overseas and a chest full of commendations. I served my country proudly. When I left the military, I thought my future was unlimited. I co-founded a cybersecurity company called SecureNet Solutions with a partner I'd met at a tech conference. The company took off. We had investors, contracts, a real future. He paused, his jaw tightening with the pain of memory. I also had someone who mattered more than any business success. My younger sister, Sarah. We grew up in foster care together, just the 2 of us against the world. She became an elementary school teacher, one of those teachers who changes kids' lives. She believed in me completely. When my company needed capital, she emptied her savings account without hesitation. We're family, she told me. We've always had each other's backs. Angela watched as Henry's professional composure cracked, raw grief breaking through despite the expensive suit and the 3 years that had passed. I promised her I'd pay her back 10 times over. I promised her I'd buy her a house, help her start her own school, make sure she never had to worry about money again. His voice broke. I never got the chance. The crowd had grown silent, leaning in to hear every word. 3 years ago, November 17th, a drunk driver crossed the median on I-90. Sarah died instantly. She was 32 years old. Henry's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She was my only family, the only person in the world who'd always been there. And suddenly she was gone. Angela's hand went to her heart. She remembered the day Henry had finally told her about Sarah, how he'd cried quietly on that bench while the world rushed past. Now she understood the full weight of what he'd lost. I fell apart, Henry said simply. Completely. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering calls. I pushed away everyone who tried to help me, friends, business partners, everyone. My grief was like drowning in slow motion. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Some days I forgot to eat. Some days I wished I'd died instead of her. He looked directly at Angela, his eyes holding hers. My business partners tried to be patient, but after 3 months, they had no choice. They forced me out of the company I'd built. And I didn't fight it because nothing mattered anymore. Without Sarah, I didn't see the point of anything. Angela wiped at her tears, but they kept coming. Within 6 months, I'd lost everything. My apartment, my savings, my purpose. I ended up on the streets, convinced I deserved to suffer, convinced my life should have ended when Sarah's did. For nearly 3 years, I existed in that darkness. Just surviving, day by day, night by night, waiting for it to finally be over. The weight of his words settled over the crowd. Several onlookers were crying openly now. And then, Henry's voice softened. On a cold October morning, you showed up. He took a step closer to Angela, his expression transforming from grief to something like wonder. You crossed that street with a sandwich and coffee in your hands. You looked at me, really looked at me, and you saw something everyone else had stopped seeing. You saw a human being. You saw someone worth caring about. Angela shook her head, tears flowing freely. You looked so lost. Henry supplied gently. Broken. I was. But you didn't look away. You didn't cross to the other side of the street. You walked right up to me and offered me food. And when I told you I had no money, you know what you said? He smiled through his own tears. You said, I'm not asking for money. Just eat. You look cold. Those simple words. That simple kindness. You have no idea what that meant to me. But then you showed up the next day, Henry continued, his voice growing stronger. And the day after that. And the day after that. Every single day, without fail, you fed me. You talked to me like I was human, like my thoughts mattered, like my presence had value. You asked my opinion. You shared your stories. You treated me with dignity when I felt worthless. His voice rose with emotion. You saw me when everyone else looked away. You cared when no one else did. And slowly, so slowly I barely noticed it happening, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that I was still alive, that my life still had meaning, that maybe, just maybe, Sarah wouldn't want me to give up. Angela was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Around them, the crowd had grown to over 50 people, all transfixed by this incredible story unfolding on a random Chicago street corner. In January, Henry said, you gave me a pair of warm socks. You'd noticed my shoes had holes. Such a small thing. But that night, sitting in a shelter, I pulled out a business card I'd been carrying for months. A card from my old commanding officer who'd told me there were people who could help. And because of you, because of your kindness, I finally found the courage to make a phone call I should have made years earlier. He gestured to one of the men in suits standing nearby. That phone call connected me to the Veterans Restoration Program. They gave me counseling, medical care, housing assistance. They helped me start processing the grief I'd been drowning in. They gave me tools to rebuild my life. Angela's eyes widened. 3 months ago, she whispered. That's why you disappeared. Yes. I entered the program in late January. I wanted to tell you, but my therapist advised me to wait until I was stable, until I was strong enough to handle everything emotionally. So I went through counseling, daily therapy sessions, group meetings with other veterans. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, harder than 2 tours overseas, facing the grief I'd been running from. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. But I did it. I faced it. And I started to heal. Not completely. I'll carry Sarah's loss for the rest of my life, but enough to believe I deserve to keep living. Enough to honor her memory by actually living instead of just existing. The suited man Henry had gestured to earlier stepped forward, holding a different folder, this one thick with documents. Henry took it but didn't open it yet. While I was in the program, Henry said, his voice taking on a note of disbelief even now, my case manager was reviewing my work history for job placement purposes. He pulled up information about SecureNet Solutions. And that's when I discovered something incredible. He paused for dramatic effect, and the crowd leaned in collectively. After I was forced out, my former partners continued building the company. They did well. Better than well. And in February of this year, just 2 months ago, SecureNet Solutions was acquired by Fortress Defense Systems, one of the largest defense contractors in the country. The suited man opened the folder, revealing official-looking documents with corporate letterheads and legal seals. The acquisition price, Henry said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was saying, was $340 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Angela's hands flew to her mouth. Under corporate law, Henry continued, even though I was forced out of the company, as an original co-founder, I'm entitled to a percentage of any acquisition that occurs within 5 years of my departure. My lawyers confirmed everything. After taxes and legal fees, my share came to approximately $38 million. The number hung in the air, impossible, incomprehensible. Angela swayed slightly, and one of Henry's associates moved forward instinctively, ready to catch her if she fell. $38 million, Henry repeated, looking directly at Angela. Angela, I went from homeless to wealthy beyond my wildest dreams in the span of 2 months. I've been working with lawyers, accountants, and advisors to organize everything. I've bought an apartment, reclaimed my identity, and started planning for the future. Tears streamed down his face now, matching Angela's. But none of it, would have happened without you. If you hadn't shown me kindness, I would never have made that phone call. I would never have entered the program. I would still be on that bench, or more likely, I'd be dead. He stepped even closer, close enough that only Angela could hear his next words despite the crowd. You saved my life, Angela Dawson. Not with money or connections or grand gestures. You saved me with simple, consistent kindness. You fed me when you could barely feed yourself. You treated me with dignity when I felt like garbage. You showed up every single day and proved that goodness still exists in this world. Angela was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I only wanted to help. I didn't know. I never imagined. I know, Henry said gently. That's what makes it so beautiful. You didn't help me because you thought you'd get something in return. You helped me because you saw a person who needed help, and you had the compassion to care. You gave when you had almost nothing to give. That's the purest form of kindness there is. He glanced at the crowd that had gathered, now over 100 people, with more joining every moment. Some were filming on their phones. Some were crying. All were witnessing something extraordinary. For the past month, Henry said, raising his voice again so the crowd could hear, I've been planning this moment. I hired investigators, not to invade your privacy, but to understand what you truly need. And what I learned broke my heart all over again. He looked at her with such compassion that Angela felt her knees weaken. You're 3 months behind on rent with an eviction notice. Your student loans are in default. You've been skipping meals to afford the food you gave me. Angela, you've been one disaster away from homelessness yourself, and you never said a word. You never complained. You just kept showing up, kept giving, kept caring. Angela's face flushed with shame and embarrassment, but Henry shook his head firmly. Don't you dare feel ashamed, he said intensely. Your sacrifice makes what you did even more extraordinary. You gave when you had nothing. You showed kindness when you were struggling yourself. That's not foolishness, that's heroism. He held up the original folder he'd given her, the one she still clutched in her trembling hands. So I made a promise to myself, Henry said, his voice ringing with determination. When I was strong enough, when I was ready, I would come back. I would find you, and I would change your life the way you changed mine. The crowd erupted in applause, but Henry raised his hand, silencing them. This moment wasn't for them, it was for Angela. Today is that day, he said softly, looking into her eyes. Today, Angela Dawson, your life changes forever. And I need you to know, truly know, that you deserve every single thing I'm about to give you. Not as charity, but as recognition of the incredible person you are. He nodded to his team, and they moved forward, ready to reveal everything he'd planned. Open the folder, Henry said gently. It's time for you to see what miracles your kindness created. Angela's hands shook so violently that she nearly dropped the folder. Henry steadied her hands with his own, his touch gentle and reassuring. Open it, he said softly. Please. With trembling fingers, Angela opened the folder. Inside was a stack of official-looking documents with legal seals and signatures. The first page had a header in bold letters, property deed transfer, but the words blurred together through her tears. She couldn't make sense of what she was reading. Henry nodded to one of his associates, the woman in the navy suit who'd emerged from the second SUV. She stepped forward with another envelope, this one larger and more formal. Angela, Henry said, his voice steady despite the emotion clear in his eyes. 3 blocks from here, on the corner of State and Lake, there's a building. It used to be a restaurant called Riverside Bistro. Beautiful space. 2 stories. Big windows overlooking the street. The owners retired and closed it down 6 months ago. Angela looked up at him, confused about why he was telling her this. I bought it, Henry said simply. 2 weeks ago. I bought the entire building. Her eyes widened. You what? Henry took the large envelope from his associate and opened it, pulling out a set of keys attached to a sleek keychain. He held them up so Angela could see them clearly, the metal glinting in the morning sun. This building, he continued, has a fully equipped commercial kitchen, top-of-the-line appliances, industrial ovens, professional-grade refrigeration, everything you'd need to run a real restaurant. The previous owners left most of the equipment because they couldn't take it with them. Angela's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the keys, then at Henry, then back at the keys, unable to process what he was saying. Henry pressed the keys into her palm, closing her fingers around them. It's yours, Angela. The building is yours. The kitchen is yours. Your dream restaurant. It starts today. For a moment, the entire world went silent. Angela stared at the keys in her hand, feeling their weight, their reality. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. People who struggled, who were behind on rent, who fed homeless men with food they couldn't afford. I can't, she stammered, her voice breaking. This is too much. Henry, I can't accept. Yes, you can, Henry interrupted gently but firmly. Angela, you gave me food every day for months when you were skipping meals yourself. You sacrificed your own well-being to help a stranger. This isn't too much. This is the bare minimum of what you deserve. Angela's legs finally gave out. She would have collapsed if Henry hadn't moved forward quickly, catching her by the arms and steadying her. The keys fell from her hand, and one of his associates caught them before they hit the ground. I can't breathe, Angela gasped. This isn't real. This can't be real. It's real, Henry assured her, his voice warm and certain. Look at the deed, Angela. Your name is on it. The building is legally yours. Free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, no strings attached. It's yours to do with as you wish. The woman in the navy suit stepped forward and gently guided Angela to sit on a nearby bench, not Henry's old bench, but one of the public benches along the sidewalk. Someone from the crowd rushed to get her water. The suited woman held Angela's shoulders as she hyperventilated, overcome with shock. Breathe, the woman said kindly. Just breathe. I know it's a lot to take in. Henry knelt down in front of Angela, bringing himself to her eye level. He waited patiently until her breathing steadied, until she could focus on his face again. Angela, he said softly, I need you to hear me. You deserve this. You deserve every bit of this and more. Do you understand? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I was just being kind. That's all. I didn't do anything special. That's exactly what makes it special, Henry said, his own eyes glistening. You were kind when you didn't have to be. You were kind when it cost you something. You were kind when nobody was watching, when there was no reward, when all you had to offer was compassion. That's the rarest, most beautiful thing in this world. Angela sobbed openly, her whole body shaking. Around them, the crowd had grown even larger. Easily 200 people now, all watching this extraordinary moment unfold. Many were crying along with Angela. Some had their hands over their hearts. Others held their phones up, recording a moment of grace that would soon spread across social media and touch millions. Henry stood and turned to his team. Show her the rest. Another associate stepped forward, a young man with kind eyes carrying a leather portfolio. He opened it and pulled out more documents, these ones with different headers and official seals. There's more, Henry said, looking down at Angela with infinite gentleness. Angela, giving you a restaurant doesn't fix the systemic problem you tried to address. You didn't just feed me. You fed me because you understood that hunger, homelessness, and human dignity are connected. You understood that everyone deserves to be seen, to be cared for, to matter. He took the documents from his associate and held them so Angela could see the top page. In elegant script, the header read, The Angela Dawson Foundation, Articles of Incorporation. Angela's eyes went wide. What is that? I've established a foundation in your name, Henry said, his voice filled with pride. a nonprofit organization with a very specific mission, feeding homeless veterans across Chicago. We're starting here, in this city, but the plan is to expand to other cities within the year. He handed the documents to the woman in the navy suit, who began explaining in clear professional terms. Ms. Dawson, the Angela Dawson Foundation has been funded with an initial endowment of $10 million. The foundation will operate mobile food services, partner with existing shelters, and create sustainable feeding programs for homeless veterans throughout the city. Angela couldn't speak. She could only stare as the woman continued. The foundation needs a director, the woman said with a small smile. Someone who understands the mission from the heart, not just the head. Someone who's proven they'll show up every single day, no matter what. Someone who sees the homeless as human beings, not statistics. Henry knelt down again, taking both of Angela's hands in his. You'll run it if you're willing. Full salary, $120,000 a year to start. Full benefits including health insurance, retirement plan, everything. You'll have a staff, resources, and all the support you need. Your only job will be to do what you've always done. Show up and care for people. I'm not qualified, Angela stammered. I don't have a degree in nonprofit management or... You have something better, Henry interrupted. You have a heart that sees people. You have consistency. You have compassion that doesn't waver even when you're struggling yourself. Angela, you're the most qualified person in the world for this job. He squeezed her hands tighter, his voice dropping to something intimate and profound despite the crowd watching. You gave me food when I was hungry. That's beautiful. But you gave me something more valuable than food. You gave me hope. You reminded me that I mattered. You showed me that someone cared whether I lived or died. That's what saved me, Angela. Not the sandwich. Not the coffee. The fact that you saw me. His voice broke slightly. You treated me like a human being when I'd forgotten I was one. You asked my opinion. You listened to my stories. You made me feel like my presence in the world still had value. That's what brought me back from the edge. That's what gave me the strength to ask for help. That's what saved my life. Angela was openly weeping now, her whole body racked with sobs. Henry continued, his own tears flowing freely. Now it's my turn to tell you something you need to hear, he said intensely. Angela Dawson, you matter. Your kindness matters. Your sacrifices matter. Your struggles matter. You are not insignificant. You are not foolish. You are not wasting your life by caring about others. You are extraordinary. You are a hero. And your life is about to change forever. The declaration hung in the air, powerful and true. Then, unable to hold herself together anymore, Angela collapsed forward into Henry's arms, sobbing against his shoulder. He held her tightly, this woman who'd saved him, who'd cared for him, who'd reminded him what it meant to be human. Thank you, she kept saying between sobs. Thank you, thank you, thank you. No, Henry whispered back, his own voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists in this world. Around them, Henry's team stood watching with tears in their eyes. The woman in the navy suit wiped at her face discreetly. One of the security men cleared his throat roughly, clearly moved. Even Marcus, Henry's assistant who'd helped plan all of this, had to look away for a moment to compose himself. The crowd's reaction was overwhelming. Some people applauded, the sound building into thunderous approval. Others cried openly, strangers moved by witnessing such raw, genuine human connection. An older woman in the crowd called out, "God bless you both," and others echoed the sentiment. A young mother with 2 children pushed through the crowd, holding out a $20 bill. "For the foundation," she said to one of Henry's associates. "I want to help." Within moments, others followed. A businessman in a suit pulled out his wallet. A college student offered $5. A construction worker handed over crumpled bills. Henry's team quickly organized, taking names and contact information, explaining how people could donate to the foundation properly. But Henry and Angela remained locked in their embrace, oblivious to the commotion around them. Two people who'd saved each other in different ways, at different times, now united in a moment of profound gratitude and transformation. When Angela finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and tear-streaked, her eyes red and puffy. She looked at Henry with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Henry replied gently. "Just accept it. Accept that you deserve this. Accept that your kindness created ripples you never imagined. Accept that you're going to help thousands of people through this foundation. Accept that your life has changed." Angela looked around at the crowd, at Henry's team, at the 4 black SUVs still idling at the curb. She looked down at the keys to her restaurant building that someone had pressed back into her hand. She looked at the foundation documents. She looked at everything that represented her completely transformed life. "My cart," she said suddenly, almost laughing through her tears. "I was so worried about making rent this month, and now I own a building. I was worried about paying for food supplies, and now I'm running a $10 million foundation. This is insane." Henry laughed too, a joyful sound. "It is insane. Beautifully, wonderfully insane." The woman in the navy suit stepped forward again. "Ms. Dawson, if you're ready, we have some papers for you to sign. Just initial documents confirming the property transfer and your position with the foundation. We can do it right here, or we can go somewhere more private." Angela looked at Henry, still seeking confirmation that this was real, that she wasn't about to wake up from an impossible dream. "It's real," he assured her again, reading her thoughts. "All of it. And there's a team of people ready to help you with every step. You won't be doing this alone." "Can I?" Angela hesitated. "Can I see the building? The restaurant?" Henry's face lit up. "I was hoping you'd ask. The cars are right here. We can go now if you want." Angela looked back at her cart, her humble food cart that had been her livelihood, her purpose, her connection to Henry all these months. It sat there looking small and insignificant compared to the black SUVs and the suited professionals and the promise of a real restaurant. One of Henry's team members, reading the moment perfectly, said, "We'll take care of the cart, Ms. Dawson. We'll secure it and store it safely. You might want to keep it as a reminder of where everything started." "Yes," Angela said immediately. "Yes, I want to keep it. Always." Henry offered her his arm. "Ready to see your restaurant?" Angela took his arm, still trembling, still crying, still barely able to believe any of this was happening. As they walked toward the SUVs, the crowd parted for them, applauding and calling out encouragement. "You deserve this. God bless you both. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." As Angela climbed into the SUV, the same one Henry had emerged from, she looked back one more time at the corner where she'd set up her cart every morning for years. The corner where she'd struggled, worried, and barely survived. The corner where she'd fed a homeless man and unknowingly planted a seed that would grow into this miraculous moment. Henry climbed in beside her, and as the door closed, shutting out the noise and the crowd, they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Thank you for saving my life," Henry said quietly. Angela turned to him, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you for saving mine." As the convoy of black SUVs pulled away from the corner, heading toward Angela's new restaurant, neither of them could have known that their story was just beginning. That by tomorrow, videos of this moment would go viral, touching millions of people around the world. That the Angela Dawson Foundation would grow beyond anyone's expectations, feeding thousands and inspiring countless acts of kindness. But in that moment, in the back of that SUV, two people who'd saved each other simply held hands and smiled, grateful for the miracle that kindness had created. The 4 black SUVs had indeed changed everything. But it was Angela's faithful heart, present long before those vehicles ever arrived, that had started it all. 3 months later, July 15th. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Angela's kitchen, casting warm golden light across the polished wooden tables and gleaming kitchen equipment. Outside, a line had already formed on the sidewalk, not of desperate people begging for help, but of excited customers eager to taste the food that had become legendary in just 3 short months. Angela Dawson stood in her kitchen, her own kitchen, wearing a crisp white chef's coat with her name embroidered on the pocket. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she plated a breakfast special: herb-roasted potatoes, perfectly scrambled eggs with chives, thick-cut bacon, and fresh fruit arranged artfully on the side. "Order up for table 7, she called out, setting the plate in the window. Her sous chef, a formerly homeless veteran named Marcus Williams, who'd been one of the foundation's first hires, grabbed the plate with a smile. "This place is packed already, chef. We're going to have a great opening weekend." Angela looked around her restaurant with a sense of wonder that hadn't faded even slightly since that miraculous April morning. The space was everything she'd dreamed of and more. Exposed brick walls gave it character. Modern light fixtures provided warmth. The open kitchen let customers watch their food being prepared. And everywhere, small touches reminded people of the restaurant's mission. Framed photos of the people the foundation had helped, inspirational quotes about kindness and community, and in a place of honor behind the register, her old food cart, preserved and mounted as a permanent installation. But Angela's kitchen was more than just a restaurant. It operated on a dual mission that reflected Angela's heart. During regular business hours, 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., it served paying customers, operating as a legitimate business that employed 15 people, many of them formerly homeless or veterans themselves. The food was excellent, the prices reasonable, and the atmosphere welcoming. But every evening from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., the restaurant transformed. The doors opened again, and anyone who was hungry could walk in and receive a hot, dignified meal completely free of charge. No questions asked. No judgment. No requirements. Just food served with respect and kindness. On this particular morning, Angela's opening day, she paused for a moment to watch her dining room fill with customers. Families with children. Business people grabbing breakfast before work. Elderly couples reading the newspaper. And scattered among them, a few individuals she recognized from the streets. People transitioning out of homelessness. People the foundation had helped. People who'd heard that Angela's kitchen was a place where everyone belonged. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. There was work to do. "Chef," one of her line cooks called out. "We need more pancake batter." Angela smiled and got to work. This was what she'd always wanted, not just to own a restaurant, but to create a place where food connected people, where everyone was welcome, where kindness was as much on the menu as the breakfast specials. 6 months later, the Angela Dawson Foundation's office occupied the second floor of Angela's restaurant building. What had started as a simple mission to feed homeless veterans in Chicago had exploded beyond anyone's initial expectations. Henry Caldwell stood at the window of the conference room, looking down at the street below where 4 black SUVs had pulled up 6 months ago and changed 2 lives forever. Behind him, the Foundation's board of directors reviewed their 6-month impact report. "We're now operating in 5 cities," announced Jennifer Martinez, the Foundation's operations director. "Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, and St. Louis. We've served over 47,000 meals to homeless veterans and individuals experiencing homelessness." Henry turned from the window, a smile crossing his face. 47,000 meals in 6 months. That's extraordinary. "It's because of the model Angela created," Jennifer continued. "The dignity-first approach. The employment pipeline that hires formerly homeless individuals. The partnership with existing shelters and veterans organizations. People believe in what we're doing because they can see it works." Angela sat at the head of the table, still sometimes surprised to find herself in this position. She'd never run a foundation before. She'd never managed budgets in the millions or overseen staff in multiple cities. But she'd learned quickly, and more importantly, she'd never lost sight of the Foundation's core mission: seeing people, not problems. Treating every individual with dignity, not charity. "We've also seen something remarkable," Jennifer added, pulling up a slide on the screen. "In the neighborhoods where we operate, Other businesses and individuals have started their own kindness initiatives. Coffee shops offering free drinks to the homeless. Barber shops giving free haircuts. Clothing stores donating business attire. Angela's story inspired people to act. Henry caught Angela's eye across the table, and they shared a moment of understanding. This was bigger than either of them now. The ripple effects of one woman's daily kindness had spread farther than anyone could have imagined. 9 months later. Please welcome to the stage Angela Dawson. The applause was thunderous as Angela walked onto the set of Good Morning America. She'd done dozens of interviews over the past 9 months. Local news, podcasts, magazine features, but national television still made her nervous. The host, a warm woman named Rebecca Chun, greeted her with a genuine smile. Angela, your story has touched millions of people. For those who haven't heard it, can you tell us how this all began? Angela took a breath, thinking back to that cold October morning that felt like a lifetime ago. It began with a homeless man sitting on a bench, she said simply. I saw him, and instead of looking away, I decided to offer him food. That's all. Just one small act of kindness. But you didn't just do it once, Rebecca prompted. You did it every day for months. Yes, because kindness isn't a one-time thing. It's a practice. It's showing up consistently, treating people with dignity consistently, reminding them that they matter consistently. Rebecca leaned forward. And that homeless man turned out to be Henry Caldwell, a decorated veteran and tech entrepreneur who'd lost everything to grief. He's now worth over $38 million and has used his resources to transform your life and the lives of thousands. That's an incredible story. It is, Angela agreed. But the most incredible part isn't the money or the restaurant or even the foundation. The most incredible part is the reminder that everyone has a story. The homeless man on your corner, the woman asking for change, the veteran sleeping in a doorway. They're all human beings with histories, with pain, with value. We just have to be willing to see them. What would you say to people watching who want to make a difference but don't know where to start? Angela looked directly at the camera, speaking from her heart. Start small. Start where you are. You don't need millions of dollars or a grand plan. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can save a life. Buy someone a meal. Learn their name. Look them in the eye and remind them that they're seen. That's how change begins. One person, one moment, one act of kindness at a time. The interview ended with information about how viewers could support the Angela Dawson Foundation. Within hours, donations poured in from all 50 states. The foundation's website crashed from traffic. Angela's story was shared millions of times across social media. But more importantly, people started acting. Across the country, individuals began their own kindness initiatives. A teenager in Ohio started making sandwiches for homeless people in her city. A retired teacher in Texas began a reading program at a homeless shelter. A corporate executive in California started a jobs program specifically for homeless veterans. Angela's story had reminded people of something they'd forgotten, that they had the power to make a difference. That kindness mattered. That one person could change the world, one small act at a time. 2 years later, Henry stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Angela's Kitchen's third location, this one in Atlanta, Georgia. The Angela Dawson Foundation had expanded to 12 cities now, serving over 200,000 meals annually and employing over 150 formerly homeless individuals in their various programs. He watched Angela work the crowd with grace and warmth, hugging staff members, thanking donors, posing for photos with community leaders. She'd grown into her role as a leader and advocate, but she'd never lost the compassion that had started everything. Their friendship had deepened over these 2 years. They talked almost daily, collaborated on foundation initiatives, and supported each other through the challenges of running a rapidly growing nonprofit. Henry had rebuilt his life and even started a new tech venture, but he always made time for the foundation that bore Angela's name. "She's something special, isn't she?" said Dr. Patricia Williams, Henry's therapist who'd attended the ceremony. "The woman who saved your life." Henry nodded, his eyes on Angela as she knelt down to talk to a young homeless veteran the foundation had recently placed in a job. She saved my life by reminding me I was human. Now she's doing the same for thousands of others. That's her gift. She sees people. And you're using your resources to amplify that gift, Dr. Williams observed. That's beautiful, Henry. Sarah would be proud. Henry's throat tightened at the mention of his sister. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it had transformed from a crushing weight into something he could carry, something that motivated him to honor Sarah's memory through action. She would, he agreed. Sarah always believed in helping people who needed help. Through Angela and the foundation, I'm finally keeping the promise I made to her, to make the world better. Present day, 3 years after that April morning, Angela stood in the original Angela's Kitchen location, now her flagship restaurant. It was early morning, before opening, and she'd come here to think. In a few hours, she'd be interviewed for a documentary about her life and the foundation. The filmmaker wanted her to reflect on everything that had happened since that miraculous day when 4 black SUVs had pulled up to her cart. She walked slowly through the dining room, running her hand along the polished tables, straightening a frame here, adjusting a chair there. Then she stopped in front of the mounted food cart. Her old cart, preserved exactly as it had been that last day she'd used it. Above the cart hung a framed photograph taken by a customer 3 years ago. It showed Angela at her cart on a cold morning, handing food to a hunched figure on the bench. Henry, though you couldn't see his face clearly. Below the photo, a brass plaque read, "Where it all began. One meal at a time." Angela touched the plaque gently, tears forming in her eyes. How different her life was now. How different everything was. 3 years ago, she'd been drowning in debt, days away from eviction, sacrificing her own well-being to feed a homeless man she barely knew. Now she owned 3 successful restaurants, ran a foundation that operated in 12 cities, employed hundreds of people, and had touched millions of lives through her story. She'd appeared on national television, spoken at conferences, and been honored by everyone from the mayor of Chicago to the president of the United States. But what mattered most wasn't the recognition or the success. What mattered was the reminder that kindness was never wasted. That showing up mattered. That treating people with dignity changed lives in ways you couldn't predict or measure. Her phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "Ready for your interview? You're going to be great. Remember, just tell the truth. Your story speaks for itself." Angela smiled and texted back, "Thank you. For everything. For trusting me with your story. For turning my small act of kindness into something that helps thousands." His response came quickly. "You turned my brokenness into purpose. We saved each other. That's the real story." And it was true. They had saved each other. Angela had saved Henry from despair and death. Henry had saved Angela from poverty and hopelessness. Together, they'd created something beautiful, a foundation built on the simple truth that everyone deserves to be seen, to be cared for, to matter. As the morning sun filled Angela's kitchen with golden light, as staff began arriving for another day of serving customers and changing lives, Angela thought about the message she wanted to share in the documentary. It would be this: kindness is showing up. It's seeing people when they're invisible to everyone else. It's giving when you have little to give. It's believing that small acts matter, that one person can make a difference, that love expressed through daily action can transform the world. The 4 black SUVs that pulled up to her cart that April morning had changed everything. The money, the restaurant, the foundation, they'd transformed her circumstances completely. But it was Angela's faithful heart, present long before those vehicles arrived, that had started the miracle. It was her choice, repeated daily for months, to see a homeless man as human, to care when caring cost her something, to show up consistently, without fanfare or expectation of reward. That choice, that daily practice of kindness, had saved 2 lives and touched millions more. And the story was still being written. Every day, in 12 cities across America, the Angela Dawson Foundation served meals to people who needed them. Every day, Angela's Kitchen welcomed customers, and reminded them that food could build community. Every day, people heard Angela's story and were inspired to perform their own acts of kindness. Ripples spreading outward from one small act. Circles of compassion growing wider with each passing day. Proof that one person, armed with nothing but a willing heart, could indeed change the world. As Angela prepared to open her restaurant for another day, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for Henry, for second chances, for the mysterious ways that kindness returns to us when we least expect it. And she made a promise to herself, the same promise she'd been keeping for 3 years. To show up, to see people, to treat everyone with dignity, to remember that we're all one bad day, one tragedy, one twist of fate away from needing kindness ourselves. To give generously, love openly, and believe that small acts matter. One person, one moment, one meal at a time. Because that's how miracles begin. That's how lives are saved. That's how the world becomes, slowly but surely, a little more kind.
If you're watching this story and feeling moved, here's what Angela would want you to know. You have the power to change someone's life today. Not someday when you're richer, more successful, or more prepared. Today. Right now. Exactly as you are. Look for the invisible people in your community. Learn their names. Buy them a meal. Treat them with dignity. Show up consistently. Be kind not because it's easy but because it's necessary. Your act of kindness might not lead to black SUVs and multimillion-dollar foundations. But it might save a life. It might plant a seed of hope. It might remind someone that they matter. And in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? To matter. To be seen. To know that our presence in this world makes a difference. You have that power. You've always had it. Now go use it. One person. One moment. One act of kindness at a time. The world is waiting for your miracle. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If this touched your heart, don't stop here. Tap the next video on your screen. The story waiting for you is even more powerful and full of twists you won't see coming.